Thank you, Kasam. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. So, as Kasam rightly mentioned, my name is Zoheb Sheikh. I work as a solution engineer for Microsoft Mission Critical customers. So, yeah, today we are essentially here to talk about security technologies. And this is more like a exam prep or what exactly you need from a AZ-500 certification perspective. This is exactly what I'm going to talk about. I will try to cover the breadth of the exam as well as what it covers into the different technologies like Azure Security Center, Sentinel, and other things. That is something which I'll try to cover. And then we will try to get some information also onto what these technologies are. So this is much in-depth course, of course, the AZ-500 or any of the Azure courses. So this workshop or this meeting is essentially to introduce you to what you can expect from the exam and how you can go ahead with the preparation of these exams and some basics of the technologies which is included into this. All right, so without much further ado, let's get started. So yeah, first things first, let's talk about some of the prerequisites as to what is a prerequisite and where you should be at if you're considering doing AZ-500 certification. So the first thing is you need to be able to understand some of the security best practices, industry requirements such as defense in depth, least privileged model, RBAC, multi-factor authentication, zero trust model. It's expected that you know some things about this. The concepts of VPN, IPsec, SSL, data encryption, hashing, these kind of fundamental security concepts, you should have some knowledge on. You should have experience on deploying Azure workloads because a lot of technologies I'm going to talk about next, it's all around Azure and how you secure those technologies. For example, Azure Identity or Azure SQL. How are you going to secure it? Azure Networks. How are you going to further secure it? So, of course, it is expected that you have some administration and deployment knowledge of Azure. If you don't have, then it would make sense for you to study those things first before jumping into the AZ-500 course. Uh, let alone this course is not going to give you infrastructure knowledge, which is kind of a prerequisite before getting the AZ-500 certification. And of course, it is expected that you have some knowledge of Windows and or Linux operating system and some scripting knowledge. Scripting is primarily something you'll need for log analytics and Azure Sentinel for threat hunting and other kind of things, which we are going to talk about later. Okay. Uh, I would like to keep this session interactive. But the way I would like to keep this interactive is if you have any questions while I'm explaining the topic, feel free to put it in the chat. Uh, I will um, I will I will keep a dedicated time at the end of the class for live question and answer sessions. But the reason why I want you to put the questions in the chat, and if it's like related to the topic, I'll take it then and there. If not, I'll take it at the end. So don't keep the questions to yourself. Feel free to ask, and then I'll try to take it as I can. Okay. So basically, if I'm going to cover the questions in the next couple of slides, I'm just going to take it in the next two slides. If that is something which I've missed, I'm going to take it immediately. All right. Now, what exactly is a Azure Security engineer do? So basically, over here, I'm talking about some of the day in, day out activities, um, which um, which an Azure Security engineer is expected to do. Basically, implementing security controls, maintaining the security posture of the organization, managing identity and access, protecting data, applications, and networks. So that is something which is the basic task of an Azure security engineer. At the same time, he's also responsible for identifying and remediating vulnerabilities by using various security tools to implement threat protection and respond to security incident escalations. So if I am an Azure security engineer for an organization, I should have access to certain vulnerability assessment tools, which we are going to talk about later, and then I should be able to understand them. I should understand the threat, and I should understand the security incident if there's a compromise or anything, and then essentially work towards it. This essentially, in this role, you will work as an extension to your cloud-based management and security team as a part of the end-to-end infrastructure. And it is expected that you have a deep understanding in networking and virtualization, and you have familiarity with scripting and automation. So that is something which an Azure security engineer is going to do. Now, from a certification perspective, let's try and understand what are the different areas this certification is going to target into. Okay, so there are four areas wherein this certification is going to test you on, and the weight of these areas is as I have shown in the slide. So identity and access security is going to be around 30 to 35% weightage. So I believe you get about 50 or 60 odd questions. In that case, you can expect around 20 to 22 questions solely on identity. Then, of course, we've got implementing platform protection, which is about 15 to 20% weightage, managed security operations, 25 to 30%, secure data and application, 20 to 25%. So these are the different areas and the kind of questions you can expect from a certification perspective. Of course, 70% being the passing, so that is something which is expected out of you. Of course, when I say percentages, so these are relative and they may vary slightly here and there, but at high level, this is what you will observe in your certifications. All right, so I'm going to get into the technology and try to understand the different areas of this certification, and what are the different technological areas in which it is expected for you to have some knowledge about. Okay, so me and Kasam, we did a video a few months back, or maybe earlier this year as well, wherein we talked about Azure Active Directory in detail in a couple of hours, basically. Now, of course, I'm not going to talk about Azure AD and some of its fundamentals in detail right now. But if in case you're new to Azure Active Directory, then feel free to go to that link and watch the video. And I'm sure in the recording, probably Kasam can put a link for that video just as a reference. All right. So from the first chapter perspective of this course, it is identity and access infrastructure, which is probably one of the most important topics when it comes to the certification prep and the weightage in terms of certification passing. So let's talk about it. So in general, Azure Active Directory from a security perspective is extremely important from an organizational perspective. So essentially what is expected from you is you are well aware about what Azure Active Directory is, what is the difference between Azure AD and ADDS, different roles in Azure AD, Azure AD domain services, Azure AD groups, administrative units, passwordless. So it is expected that you have some knowledge about this. I'm going to show you these at a very high level right now, wherein I'm just going to talk about what exactly these are. And as I said, I have a separate video for this. So if in case it's difficult for you to keep up with what I'm showing, maybe you can have a look at the video, and that is something which will essentially help you. So I'm going to share my another screen just to show you a little bit on the Azure AD features, and then later we'll talk. I'll show you a couple of demos as well. So from an Azure AD features perspective, this is what is important from our side. for us to know. So on premises, we have got Active Directory. So this is something which is on premises always. So I've got my Active Directory domain controllers on premises. Then I use Azure Active Directory to synchronize my on-premises Active Directory using Azure AD Connect. Okay. And this Azure AD Connect helps me synchronize my users and passwords. I mean, passwords could be optional, but yeah, essentially my users with Azure Active Directory, basically it does the directory synchronization, which enables me to access all the services in the cloud. So services like Office 365, you're all logged in on Teams, Exchange Online, different Office 365 services, different registered app. It could be Microsoft, it could be non-Microsoft, and essentially it gives me a single sign-on experience of all the services which I'm using primarily. So that is something which Azure Active Directory helps me. Now I'm going to show you some quick demo and try to show you what exactly you can expect when you talk about Azure Active Directory. Let me know if you guys can see my screen. All right, I believe you should be able to now. So I'm just going to go to Azure Active Directory and talk about some of the terms which is important and specific to this conversation. Okay, so inside Azure Active Directory, it is obviously synchronized with your on-prem Active Directory, and in my case, my test tenant is not, but in your case, it might be. From a security perspective, it is important that you're well aware of what kind of roles and responsibilities are there in Azure Active Directory. If you have built in some custom roles, if you have built in some, if you're using some built-in roles, all of these things, it is important for you to understand. Now, if I have to give you a sample, some of the important roles in Azure Active Directory are Global Administrator. So basically, this role can manage your entire Azure AD tenant and use Microsoft Azure AD identities. Then we have got your security administrator, which is again an important built-in role. So this can read your security information, reports, manage configuration of Azure AD and Office 365. At the same time, it can do some of the other tasks as well, like managing MFA and some of the other things. Billing admin. Billing admin can perform billing related tasks and stuff like that. We have got a global reader who can read everything a global administrator can, but he's a reader, so he can't do any kind of edits. So basically, from a security perspective, we used these built-in roles in Azure Active Directory to secure access to what these users need to have. Like for example, if I've got an Exchange admin, then there might be a role which is specific to Exchange, like Exchange administrator. So as an identity and access security admin, it is expected that you are able to govern these aspects of Azure Active Directory, wherein you're only giving permissions to what they need to. So that's essentially what roles and administrator define, which is some of the built-in roles. Now, another example which I'd like to give you is basically there are users and groups. So that is something which is, so if you have got Azure AD synchronization, which is from on-prem AD to Azure, if you're synchronizing, this is something which can help you in defining which users are directory syncs, which are users are cloud only users. And if in case you need to define into some kind of groups, these groups could be security groups, these group could be some of the other types of groups also, or it could be an on-prem synchronized groups also. So that is something which you can define right here, which is again very important from a security perspective, because if you want to give permissions to somewhere, you need to be in a position to define those groups and other things as well. Now, another interesting thing which came up a couple of years back was administrative units. Imagine this being similar to your on-prem organizational unit. So in this case, what happens is, for example, if I've got various branches across the globe and different countries, and there are different admins, and I want those admins, so hypothetically, there is an IT admin team in the US, there's one in India, and then there's one in Middle East. I want the Middle East folks to be able to manage their users themselves, and across country people are not going to manage it. In that case, you use something called as administrative units to essentially assign them different kind of permissions. Okay, so that is where you will be able to use administrative units, and then you can define certain owners of these administrative units also, which kind of helps you ensuring that only the people who needs to have access to this. Okay, so that's how it is. And then of course there are various properties which I can configure from a roles and administrator perspective. If I want to assign some groups, that is something which I can define from here as well. Just going to cover some of the other information also from my quick PowerPoint, quick whiteboard. Okay, so as I said, I have a detailed video on this, but if in case you need a little bit of information, I'm going to talk a little bit about how exactly this is working. So just saying, if in case you are on unmute, just go ahead and mute yourself. It just helps from the audio perspective. All right. So from an Azure AD perspective, as I said, the fundamental of Azure Active Directory is it's an identity. So this identity essentially you use for synchronizing your on-prem identity, which is Active Directory, with cloud identity, which is Azure Active Directory. There's a set of tools which you can use for doing it, and I'm going to talk about those tools in a couple of minutes again as well. But it is Azure Active Directory, ADFS, or PTA. What those are, that is something which I'm going to talk about. But the eventual goal of you to synchronize your on-prem identity with cloud identity is to get single sign-on experience. By single sign-on, what I mean is I don't have to enter credentials multiple times, not multiple times, but I don't have to enter different credentials multiple times. I'm using the same credentials for logging into my machine, to my email, to my Azure AD integrated apps. Everywhere I'm able to use the same machine. So that's essentially the idea of getting single sign-on from the environment. Okay, I'm just going to check real quick if there are any questions in the chat. If not, I will move ahead. Okay. All right, I am going to move forward with where we were. All right, so as I talked about uh, a little bit on Azure AD and on-prem Active Directory domain services, very briefly, is that Azure Active Directory is a modern authentication protocol, which is based on the structure of tenants. So if you have got Azure AD for your organization, for example, if you have got Kasam at dearazure.net. Dear Azure is a Azure tenant which you're using. And if you have got an on-prem Active Directory, then we divide them into forest, domains, and organizational units. These two directories, they relate with each other, but at the same time, they are very, very different. So your on-prem Active Directory for authentication uses protocols like Kerberos, NTLM. When it comes to Azure Active Directory, we use protocols like SAML, OpenID Connect, OAuth-based protocols, WS Federation-based protocols. So it's basically an internet-based service, Azure Active Directory, where applications like Office 365, Azure Service, and third-party SaaS applications can essentially authenticate. And from our scope perspective for this presentation, essentially we should be in a position to secure these identities using various features which I discussed. So it's not one. Okay, so it's not that there is a click and then you secure it. There is a group of feature which organizations decide if they want to use it or if they don't want to use it. Now, what Azure Security paper or the certification covers is the security aspect of these roles. Okay, so when you're studying these roles and studying AZ-500, it is expected that you have studied the Azure 104 or 103 certifications, so that you have some fundamental understanding about some of these terms which I'm talking about. If in case you do not have the fundamental understanding, then you must get some fundamental understanding about these terms before we dive into security aspects of these tools. Now, an important strategy from a Azure AD perspective when I'm talking about security is also to define what kind of technologies I'm going to use for my on-prem directory to synchronize with the cloud identity. This is driven by multiple parameters. It can be driven by security, it can be driven by compliance. But I'm going to talk about a
తెలుసుకో
couple of
తెలుసుకెళ్తావు
ways.
కదా ఉండు కళ్ళు మూయి.
Excuse me, is there a question? Okay, sorry, I think, yeah, thanks, Kasam, for whoever muted him. All right, so let's talk about the hybrid identity world. So when it comes to hybrid identity, you get a few options when it comes to hybrid identity as to what exactly you can choose. From a hybrid identity perspective, would you go for a password hash sync? Would you not go for a password hash sync? And how would you go about it? So I'm going to talk about a little bit on these one by one, starting with, let's talk about Azure AD Connect. So the fundamental of Azure AD Connect is, as I said earlier, it integrates your on-premises directory with Azure Active Directory. So that's the function of it. There has been a history of it, and for that you can see the previous video which Kasam has pasted. But at high level, that is what it is. Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync, this is something which is new. So this is an optional, or rather, this is an alternative to Azure AD Connect. Okay, so it is an alternate method for you to synchronize your on-prem with cloud. Runs standalone. It can run with Azure AD Connect. The advantage of this is in a multi-forest environment, Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync works, but Azure AD Connect does not really work in a multi-forest environment, and then it has some limitations. So that's why Microsoft released Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync, basically. Now, one of the important topics which I want to talk about very briefly, probably in the next 2 minutes, is the different kind of authentication options you get. So, namely, there are three authentication options which you get, which is something which I have explained, which is written just in the next 3 lines, which is password hash sync, pass-through authentication, and PTA and ADFS. So these are the three different types of synchronizations which you can expect. I'm going to explain you very briefly on these as well from my whiteboard. Okay, let's see if I can delete this and share with you something. So this is the first type, wherein what I'm doing is I have got an on-prem AD and I have got something like Azure AD Connect right in between here. So all I'm doing is I'm synchronizing my cloud identity, my on-prem identity with cloud identity using Azure AD password hash sync. So that is something which is which is password hash. What password hash means is my authentication or my passwords are hashed. Okay, so if you know the concept of hashing, hashings are irreversible and it is one way only. So what happens is your passwords are hashed and then the hashed passwords are synchronized with the cloud. So that is something which is hashing. Hashing is an irreversible mechanism, which is something which makes it secure also. So that is one of the reasons why you might use password hash. Pass-through authentication, in this case, what you do is you do not synchronize your password hash with the cloud. Instead, you install some agents on premises. So I'm going to install these pass-through authentication agents on premises, and these agents essentially um, take care of my authentication. So the passwords do not reside in cloud, but they continue to be on-prem and they might be used. So why would you use it? You might use it from a compliance or security requirement for your organization. So you might be able to choose what exactly is the type of authentication you're looking at. And finally, the federated authentication, or the one which uses ADFS. This is the old, or let me put it this way. This is the first authentication type which came in, which is to federate the users and use them. So that is, in this case, what happens is your on-prem directory is still synchronized with Azure, but the passwords are not synchronized. For you to authenticate, you must use an ADFS server on-prem to authenticate, even externally or internally. You could use web application proxies to authenticate also, which is like the front end for ADFS. Okay, so that's like very, very briefly what I could explain you, the three authentication types. Again, as I said, the purpose of this presentation is not for me to take you through the basics, but just kind of introduce you as to what you can expect and what you need to know. So generally, the scenario-based question, which is going to come in AZ-500, it is going to come like that you have an organization who is expected to have not you don't want to synchronize your passwords in cloud. What kind of options do you have from an MCQ? So they will give you three MCQ, wherein they'll say password hash sync, pass-through authentication, federation with Azure AD. So this is somewhere you have to choose and define, and you could only do that if you are well aware about the technology. All right, moving forward, password write-back is a small feature in hybrid identity, which is essentially used for ensuring that your passwords which are written in cloud, they get synchronized with on-prem. There are various reasons why you might need it. I'm not going to get into those reasons, but again, this is a security specific feature wherein if I reset my password in cloud, it gets synchronized with on-prem. If I reset it on-prem, that gets synchronized in cloud. So that's essentially what password write back is for you. Okay. Now I'm going to show you a little bit of demo and talk about some of the Azure AD identity protection policies. So now we understand a little bit about some of the previous concepts. So we might be in a position to understand a little bit more as to how this is working. So Azure AD identity protection is all about implementing the tools and technology which can protect your Azure Active Directory. Okay, so I'm going to share my Azure portal with you guys and show you real quick. Okay, so let's talk about it now. So first of all, let me talk about some of these security features. So if you navigate to your Azure Active Directory portal, one of the first things which I'll use from an identity perspective is if I want to see things related to security, this is the place for me to go. And this is where most of the features which I'm going to talk about in this slide reside. So from your Azure portal, go to security. This is most of the things which I'm going to talk about now reside. So expect like at least 10% question on some of these features which I'm going to show you right now. From a certification perspective, expect around 10% questions, specifically around these things. Now, if there are any risky sign-ins in my environment, so there can be various types of risky sign-ins which an organization can get. Now, of course, it's my test tenant, so you'll not see a lot of sign-ins, but generally, if I have got people signing in, like for me, I'm based out of Qatar. Kasam is based out of Mumbai. Would you expect Kasam to travel from Mumbai to China in a day, or in a day he can definitely, but in a few minutes, definitely can't. Azure AD has ability to detect these risks. These risks are not only detected based on location. So for example, Azure AD saw a sign-in attempt from Kasam, Dear Azure, at 10 o'clock in the morning India time, and at 10:10 he saw a sign-in attempt um, from China or from some other part of the world. This is definitely suspicious. Azure AD has ability to detect these risks. Okay, it has ability to detect these risks, but it can't respond to these risks. You have to configure the automated response to these risks. So there are various algorithms inside Azure Active Directory which helps you identify these types of attacks. Like for example, if there's any attempts which is coming from a sinkhole domain, or if there's any legacy authentication attempts coming, or if there are any attempts which is not using MFA, which is using some of the weak protocols, that is something you can govern from here. So you, in this case, for the risk sign-ins, you will be able to detect which sign-in happened, where it happened, what was the reason why it is called as risky. Is Microsoft saying that this is compromised? Whatever, all this information you will see here. From a risk detection perspective, also you will see similar information. Users will be classified based on their risk, like confirmed compromised, uh, at risk. So essentially, this is what will tell you that, I see multiple risky sign-ins, and there is something which this user could be at a risk. And as it states, it could be at risk or it could be confirmed compromise. When you see the table here, it will tell you like what exactly is the risk state and the risk level of this user. So that's why this is extremely important from an organization perspective. Another important thing from an identity security perspective is your identity secure score, which is something you will see here. So in this is the place wherein you will see what exactly is your identity secure score. Uh, for similar organizations like yours, so if you are a healthcare organization, what kind of secure score do healthcare organizations typically have, or some of the other industries might have? Now again, it's my test tenant, so I don't have a secure score, but if you have a production tenant and if you go to Azure Identity Secure Score, you will be able to see the actions which you could perform to improve your secure score, and how has been the secure score historically since last 90 days, 60 days, 30 days. How has been the secure score? All of this you will be able to see from a score history, basically. Now, another important thing, I talked about risky sign-ins, okay? And I can't talk about risky sign-in and not tell you what identity protection is, because they are directly related to each other. What kind of protection do you want to apply for risky users? What kind of organizational policies you want to have? This is something which gets defined here. So users at low risk, users at high risk, users at medium risk, what do you want to do with these users? If a user is detected as high risk, do you want to block its access? Do you want to allow the access and ask him to change the password? These are the controls which is something which you define here. So I would define like maybe block access or ask him to reset his password or something, or force him for multi-factor authentication. This is something which you define based on the risk level. So if a user is confirmed compromise, I would probably want to block his access and then ask the help desk to reset its password. So that's how you can have a process initiated by you already. Another thing which it can do is it can set up an automatic alerting for you also. So that is something which you can set up alerts for your organization, so that you are aware and you are able to action them as well. Conditional access is another way of securing your identity and securing your cloud identity. This is one of the most crucial parts, because traditionally, if I'm in a position to control things, you get a sense of security. So for example, if I have a cloud app and I'm able to control who can access the app, fine, that is something which is there. But I want to have some further controls, like you know conditions. Okay, so if a user is risky, what conditions I want to apply? So if a user is at high risk, I'm going to apply this concept. What kind of sign-in risk I want to disallow? You would want to be in a position to choose. Conditional access essentially helps you in a position to control how you want to give access to your users. So in this case, I can tell that, you know what, I trust MFA. So for you to get access, you definitely need to have MFA. Your device needs to be compliant, marked compliant through Intune policy. If your device is not compliant, if you haven't done the latest patching, or if your iPhone or Android device doesn't have the right patches, I'm not going to allow you. You have to first complete the patch and then come to me. So this is something, these are the kind of conditions you can define. And of course, you can define some exceptions also. So that's how conditional access comes in very, very handy for you. Okay, I am going to go back to my slides and cover some of the other concepts because there's a long list. We are at the first 30% only. So I just want to be sure that I am able to give you all the information from a certification perspective. Technically, I don't think definitely I can't give you all the information because it's like a 40 hours course or something. But I would like to give you as much information I can in the next 1.5 hours or so. Moving back to my slides. This is what I explained you. Another thing is from a securities perspective, you must configure is the Azure AD MFA registration. It's at the same place which I showed you from the security tab, wherein you can define what kind of Azure AD security policies you can have from your organization perspective. It is expected that you have an understanding of Microsoft's zero trust model. The modern zero trust model, wherein we don't trust anyone, but at the same time, we want to allow users to be able to access resources from anywhere, from sitting at home, from sitting at cafeteria, from an airport. We need to allow users. And this model is built on multiple things. Like the zero trust model essentially is built on many things like securing your the way you access it, having the right tools to help you find out what exactly needs to have you need to have access, securing your identities, having fundamental concept of assume breach. Okay, so we are assuming the breach can happen, and yeah, so if you're thinking the zero trust model is about strong perimeter security, it is, but it's not just that. It has come above that. So the way security was being thought of previously and the way security is being driven right now, it is different. So if I have to tell you a little bit on the second point from a evaluation perspective. So traditionally, okay, so now I'm talking about like 5 years. So even 5 years is traditional for the cloud era, but let's say 10 years. Traditionally, on-premises identity provider was used. There was no single sign-on present between cloud and on-prem. So essentially, if many of you were working in the 2008, 7, 10 era, you would have multiple credentials to access your inside organizational application. If you want to access something externally for your organization, then definitely you would have different credentials. Another thing which was traditionally there was visibility to identity related risks was very limited. But now with with the present era we are living it, we have ability to authenticate with federated on-premises system. So you can have synchronization and you can federate your on-premises system using the different details I've shared. You could use device, locations, behavior analytics, real time to determine the risk and deliver ongoing protection. So it's not like once you implement a solution, it doesn't change for years. It keeps changing. There is evolution which completely happens from a security side from Microsoft, and there is evolution which happens from a security. There needs to be an evolution which needs to happen from an organizational perspective also to improve it. There needs to be analytics for you to have visibility as to what exactly you are doing in your organization. So that is something which is extremely crucial and important. And as I said, from a zero trust perspective, it is built um, on the fundamental of assume breach. So basically, the perimeter defenses is no longer the focus of security professionals. Modern organizations need to support access from data and services at any place, even outside the corporate firewall. So you are not in your zone anymore. You are everywhere. So that's essentially what the zero trust model talks about. I'm going to explain you a little bit on the Azure AD PIM because it's an important feature. So I'm going to explain, I'm going to probably share my screen and try and show you guys what exactly Azure AD privileged identity management is. Okay. Yeah, I have it configured. Okay. Azure AD privileged identity management. So the concept of Azure AD privileged identity management is to give just in time and just enough access to any user who intends to use it. This is something which is very crucial from an Azure AD governance and security perspective. So I am only giving access to someone who needs to, and only for the time he needs to have access. Like in this case, okay, if you see here, I have a couple of active assignments like security and global administrator, but I'm eligible to, okay, actually I'm eligible to all. Okay, but yeah, so essentially what you might see in real life is you are eligible and then you have to click to activate. And when you click to activate, it is going to tell you that, you know what, this is the amount of time, this is the role, this is the amount of time which I will be activating you on. And it will be like 2 hours, 3 hours. After that, your rights will be revoked automatically. There are some further security controls also you can add in here. Like you want an approval to be triggered if you request for a security role, or if you request for a VM admin role, there will be an approval which will trigger to the respective owner of the VM or the technology. And that can essentially define if you can access it or if you can't access it. So yeah, there are various options. There is eligibility, and from here, if you have already, then you can deactivate yourself or whatever you want to do. So that is something which is available as a part of PIM. Another important part of PIM is you get an ability to review access. So basically, who has access to your Azure AD roles? Like who has access to security administrator? Who has access to global administrator? This is something which you can review this right from this console. If you have got multiple Azure resources, you can review it from here as well as to who has access to it. So essentially, the concept of just in time and just enough access through PIM can work for both. It can work for your Azure AD roles and it can work for any of your Azure resources also. For example, your subscription, VMs, resource groups, anything. This is something which can work. Okay, I'm going to move on. Oh, wait, let me show you one more thing if I can. Okay, yeah, this is what I wanted to show you. So inside Access Review, if you want, you can get some detailed information also. You can have this information graphically and everything. What I have done is I have included all the groups to be my Access Review. So that's why I have a huge list. But yeah, This is something which you can do, and this is something which can really help you, an organization, from an Azure AD access review perspective. Okay, I'm going to share back my slide, and we'll go back there and talk about some of the other things. Okay, resume. All right, so it's loading up. Yeah. From an enterprise governance perspective, okay, before I move to enterprise governance, I just want to take probably 3 to 4 minutes to take if there are any questions so far. If not, I'll move to the enterprise governance.
Yeah, Abhishek this side. So all this um, Azure AD identity protection is based on your domain identity, right? Your AD.
Yep,
So, so if I need to integrate this Azure AD with our application, we can do with the domain authentication, right?
definitely. That's a good question, Nalin, right? So
Yeah,
yes, you
Abhishek.
can. Okay, Abhishek. So yes, the question is, if I have to reiterate, so I have, so Abhishek has an environment which has multiple application, and he wants to integrate them with Azure AD and essentially use the security features, multiple security features which I talked about, like PIM, MFA, controlling authentication, using modern authentication like OAuth, SAML. Definitely, you can.
Yeah,
There
yeah.
is something called as Azure AD app registration. I think I'm going to cover it briefly in the next few slides. So maybe I can show you a quick
Okay.
demo also. So yes, there are certain pre-built global apps which you can integrate with Azure AD and make use of all these security features. Definitely.
Okay, so app password and app user application specific identity can also be integrated with the Azure AD, right? Apart from the
Definitely.
domain. Okay, okay, thanks.
Definitely. So you can have direct Azure AD authentication also. We have a concept of service principals in Azure AD, similar to what you had traditionally on premises, which was service accounts. So that is something which can happen. More to that, you can if at all you have to use user accounts, you can securely keep their passwords inside a HSM based device, which I'm going to talk about last into our presentation. But yes, definitely. To answer to your question, it is possible. Just hold on. For more details, I'm going to share in the next few slides. Okay, I'll take one more question before I move ahead, if in case anyone has it. Okay, so since there's silence, I'm assuming no, so I'm going to move forward. Okay, now now I'm coming into from identity. I'm coming into little bit of infrastructure. Okay, so here the enterprise governance from an Azure security perspective is very crucial. Like what kind of Azure hierarchy you've got? Do you have subscriptions with the appropriate permissions? Do you have resource? Do you have the right resource group permission? Do you have the right RBAC group permissions? Um, and are you applying the least privileged kind of an example? This is very, very crucial. And again, as I said, from an Azure security paper perspective, we expect you to know the technologies already. Maybe you're not aware of the security side of these technologies, but it is expected that from our perspective, you know what Azure subscriptions are, what management groups are, before diving deep into security, wherein you define how to make these things secure, how to review roles and stuff like that. But yes, definitely this is something which is extremely crucial. Uh, let me take a minute and talk about the shared responsibility model. Okay. Now, one of the major misconceptions of cloud is that if I put anything in cloud, it is secured by default. It is not. To a lot of extent, it is. Okay. To a lot of extent, it is. But to some extent, it is not. This is something which is the responsibility of the people or the of the organization essentially who is putting their workloads to the cloud. So um, so there are certain things, like for example, from an Azure perspective, I think I had a nice diagram which I can show it to you here real quick. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and talk about it. Okay. All right, let me show it to you. Right. Okay, so this is the shared responsibility model which I was talking about. So as you can see, it's divided into four parts. So SaaS, PaaS, IaaS, and platform. It is important for you to have an understanding of what this is basically. So the ones in the blue is something which is a customer responsibility. And the ones in the other color, which is gray kind of a color, it's a Microsoft responsibility. Now, of course, if you have got solutions completely on-prem, it is your responsibility. But depending on the different types of workloads which you're going to have, it might be your responsibility to ensure that you are securing these workloads. So if you're using SaaS, if you're using PaaS, IaaS, it's a shared responsibility model. It's not just that it's the vendor or Microsoft responsibility to deal with it. You as an organization are responsible to cover your areas, which I just spoke about. Okay, and of course, for you to cover these areas, there are different technologies which come in. Like, for example, identity and access needs to be dealt separately. SQL. So, for just an example, you have got a storage account in Azure. Now, Microsoft gives you protection for storage accounts, but are you really protecting them? It's your responsibility. So, having protecting storage account from networks, giving them access to only specific networks. So that is something which is which belongs to a shared responsibility model. Okay. Now, just talking a little bit about that, there are certain advantages which you get with a cloud enabled approach and a traditional security approach. There is a lot of blocks, or there is a lot of open areas which cloud enabled approach helps you again. So basically, on-premises security responsibilities were a little challenging. There were a lot of open areas, but with shift to cloud, there is you are able to secure your resources much easier. So from an identity perspective is different, from a resource perspective it is different. And then of course you have much richer capabilities for access reviews and finding out what exactly is going on. Traditionally, like when I was on the field, I was working as a field engineer for Microsoft. And when I used to go to customers, they used to have, and probably they still have it nowadays also, they used to have these yearly audits, and they used to do these penetration testings once in a year. It's good that you're doing penetration testing once in a year, or you're doing some kind of security audits to help you improve your processes, your systems and everything. But once in a year, that's a gap in itself. So if there's a security vulnerability on a newly deployed application, I will have to wait for 1 year for a security auditor to come in and audit it. It doesn't work this way in today's era. We need real-time analysis. We need real-time vulnerability detection. We need to find out what exactly is going on every minute from an organization perspective, because data and security is important. Like someone said, uh, the third world war is not going to be it's not going to be through bombing, but it's going to be digital. It's going to be over data. So so that's why data and security becomes extremely crucial. From a cloud enablement approach perspective, it is crucial that you take advantages of some of the things which cloud native security features give you. And then of course I'm going to talk about some few of the security features in the next slides also. But what I want to cover right now is a little bit on the Azure hierarchy and how does this influence the security of an organization. So I'm going to go back and share my screen. All right. So as you can see in my screen, so basically, so of course my this is my subscription and I have limited resources in my subscription, but for you, your organization might be different. I'm going to take an example of management group structure. So management group is like a hierarchy in which my management has defined my organization, and it also defines who has control over these things and how these things are defined. So if you see, my management group is in such a way that I have got a tenant root management group, then I've got my management group, and then I have certain dev and infra management groups. Uh, these management groups can be defined in different ways. So I have seen organization like big organization, large organization, enterprise customers would define it based on countries. So for example, if they're spread across 20 countries, they might define majorly, like how I have defined dev, identity, and infra, they might define 20 country specific management groups. Okay. Inside those 20 specific country specific management group, they might have further segregation by departments like IT, compute, X department, X application, different management groups, which is followed by that. And inside those management group lie your subscription. Okay. Now I'll tell you one vulnerability, which most of the organizations have, is they don't have management groups. So they don't really have management groups, which means the person who has permissions at the top essentially has permission on all the resources, which is so bad, right? Which is extremely bad. Uh, I have a blog. Maybe I'll share it later in the chat, wherein I've talked about how I managed to hack a server just by having some extra permissions. So that is something which is possible, you know. So what as an organization, what I need to do is I need to define a formal management group hierarchy. I need to be in a position to control who has access to what, who can do what. This is something which I need to control. I can't give blanket permission. So that's why if I have department, so if my IT is spread across department, wherein certain applications are managed by certain teams, you need to ensure that their hierarchy only support has visibility to their management group and doesn't have visibility to all the management group. So that is something which becomes crucial. This is something which you control by RBAC and access control. This is what you define at the management group level, and you define at the subscription resource group level also. So of course, at the top, as you can see, at the top, you have got your management groups. And below the management groups, you've got your subscription. So for example, if I go to my Azure Identity subscription, inside the subscription, I've got resource groups. And inside these resource groups, I've got various resources. So that's how it works. The control needs to be at every layer. Now, there are different organizations who implement different methods to implement it, which is fine, but you need to have control. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Okay, let me switch back to my presentation and I'm going to move forward. What is the difference between administrative units and management groups? Good question. So you will use administrative units for segregating different users and groups based on locations or whatever. And you define who has rights to those users and like let me put it in simple words. Administrative units is for user management. Okay, if you want to set up if you want to reset a password for the user, if you want him to be enrolled for MFA, blah blah blah, anything related to the user management, that is something administrative units help you with. Management group is more related to Azure subscriptions and resources. So what you do is the groups which you have created in Azure Active Directory, you define permissions based on that groups into the management group. So management group is like a structure of how your organization is. Like take an example of on-prem. If you have got on-prem and if you've got 10 data centers and 10 business units, you define structure based on that. Similarly, in Azure, we use management group for that. So management group is completely different than administrative units. Administrative units is user management basically. Okay. I'm just taking a couple of other questions. Is MFA, PIM, etc. are license-based features? Yes. MFA is free. Uh, of course, with Azure AD Basic, it gets you some of the very basic features of MFA. As you grow on licenses like Azure AD P1 and P2, you get more and more features. Generally, the security products which I spoke about, like conditional access, secure score, they are all license based. They need P1 licenses. But out of that, MFA is one which doesn't have to be P1 or P2 license. Um, what are the parameters secure score are calculated? How the percentage calculates? That's a good question. So secure score basically is about how I am doing from a security perspective. This is built on, there are various factors which influences your percentage. One is the industry factor. And the second is just the fact that Microsoft gives ranking or percentages to each component. And then these components are basically driven by risk. So for example, if I don't have MFA enabled for my admins, it is a high risk. So if Microsoft is giving 5 points to some of the other feature, like a user is not having MFA enabled, he might have a risk of 1 or 5. But if an admin doesn't have, they might call it as 20, 25 points in terms of risk. So based on the severity of the issue and what the issue is, the percentage of the score is defined. The industry is the score is industry dependent also. Yeah, sorry, I had a tongue twister there, but yeah, that's how it is defined. And I think there was a third question. What kind of licensing do we need to configure CAS policies? What is CAS? Okay, maybe you can just answer that and then I'll try to explain it. Cloud security advantage. Okay, if that's what you mean. No, cloud security advantage doesn't need any management policies. Even for management groups, you do not need licensing. All you need is Azure subscriptions for you to have it. Okay, I am going to move on and then I'll take up some of the other questions later as well. Now, the another important parameter in all of this is Azure policies. Like what kind of policies from an organizational perspective I'm defining. Again, I'm sharing this at a very high level. Uh, Basically, Azure policy runs evaluation and scans for non-compliant resources inside my Azure tenant. So if you've got a subscription which you haven't patched, then it's going to trigger an alert for you that you know what, you need to patch it. And then it can govern it also. So if you are not going to patch it in 1 month, we are going to delete your resources. That is something which Azure policy can do. You can enforce by policy that if you have a server in cloud that needs to be backed up, and through Azure policy, you can scan it and verify that you can verify that the policy is there. If it is not there, then you have ability to enforce and govern these also. Uh, Another policies you as an organization I can enforce is basically I can say that you know what, you can only have certain SKU specific permissions in these and it's not allowed to have everything. So those are the things which you can enforce. So in short, uh, is basically you can enforce and assess what kind of resources you have through Azure policies. And of course, the owners of those respective resources would have to you know um, would have to take care of that. Else, you have ability to enforce some restrictions also on them. Okay, Azure-based access controls. So there are two types of controls which you can get. One is there are two types of RBAC you can get. A resource-based access control, we call it RBAC. So RBAC can be Azure AD admin role specific, or it can be user specific. Okay, so let me show it to you. All right, I'm going to share my screen real quick. There it is. There it is. No, not this one. I need to share another screen. Okay. All right. This is the screen. So as I said, Azure-based RBAC is based on two things. One is Azure group specific and then subscription and resource specific. So like in this case, I can define, so this is my Azure identity subscription. So if I go here and go to subscriptions, I get to see the different kind of subscriptions I have. So let's me take an example of Azure identity. And inside Azure identity, I can define who has access, who doesn't have access. So that's like a resource based, kind of permission assignment. I can have resource group based permission assignment also. Like I have this group and I can define permissions right on the resource group, and anyone who has access to this resource group, if it has any resources inside it, he will have permissions on those resource groups also. So yeah, that's how we define permissions, either on the subscription or on certain resource groups, basically. Okay, while it's loading, you mean conditional access? Yes, for conditional access, we need a minimum of Azure AD P1 license for you to use conditional access. So that's a requirement again. Okay. Now, very briefly, I'm going to talk about some of the other things here, which is around built-in roles. I showed you the Azure AD built-in roles, what they are. Resource logs is basically if I have certain production resource, I need to be able to lock it so that there's no accidental deletion. So that's kind of important from a health and security perspective also. Yeah, let's talk about blueprints. So blueprints are important. So from a security perspective, blueprints are essentially defined to help an environment set up. Okay, so there can be various type of blueprints which you can have, like certain compliances, like the CIS compliance you can define, and based on these compliance you can assess your infrastructure if it is meeting what it is needed to meet the compliance. So blueprint essentially defines your organizational specific standard, which it has adopted for resources. Generally, even on premises, you would have hardening policies or certain practices and policies based on which your environment is built. Similarly, in Azure, we call them blueprints. So there are different types of blueprint, like CIS is there, and I'm sure there are like HIPAA and PCI and some of the other compliances based blueprints which you can have also. If in case you do not meet those compliances, then it's going to alert you that, you know what, this is the reason why you're probably not meeting the compliance, and that is something which you might have to do to meet the compliance. So essentially, this is what can help you build and architect your resources, which is based on certain compliance requirement. Let me check if I can give you a couple of names of some compliances. I'm just trying to open the. Yeah, I don't think I have the names right now, but this is the link which talks about blueprint in a lot more detail. I'm just going to put it in the chat. All right. Let's move forward. Another thing is with Azure subscription management. So there are a couple of ways organizations do it. Okay, one of the ways of doing it is by creating pay-as-you-go subscription, which a small to medium-based organization might do. But a lot of bigger organization or enterprise level organization might have something called as enterprise agreement with Microsoft. So basically, in the enterprise agreement, what happens is there is a EA portal through which you provision subscription. So it is important from an organizational perspective also that you are in a position to define what kind of policies and procedures you are going to have for the subscription management, in what situation you're going to add subscription, Is it going to be like, if a department owner comes to you, that's when you're going to add a subscription, or how exactly it's going to be? That is something which you define as a part of subscription management. Okay, I'll wait for 2 minutes here and take up if there's any other questions, or else I'll move forward with some of the other things. Okay. Since there's silence, I'm assuming there is no question, and I'm going to move forward. Okay, this is the cloud security advantage which I was talking about. So traditional approach, security was kind of challenging, and in the cloud-enabled approach, it is much easier. Okay, now let's talk about implementing platform-based protection. So basically, we'll talk about perimeter security and how exactly these things function. Okay, now just give me a minute here. Okay, so the question is if the blueprints are subscription based or resource group based. It could be both. Generally, these are organization based. That's how we keep it. So you define organizational strategy for your blueprint, and it's not just specific to, if I want to do it per subscription or per resource group. So yeah, that's how we do it.
So the subscription security is done by the security team in the all this configuration.
So there's a lot of echo in your voice. I can't hear you properly. But if I understood you, you're asking whose responsibility is it to take care of subscription management and other things. It is varied, but generally it's the Azure infra team who takes care of this part. Okay. All right, now let's talk a little bit about perimeter security, network security, and host security now. So I'm going to discuss. There are a lot of different topics into the perimeter security, network, and host security, but I'm going to try and discuss as many as I can. Again, as you might be observing, these terms and terminologies are again the ones which you study in some of your AZ administration exams. So of course, you are going to have it, but from an AZ-500 perspective, the questions would be like, you have X kind of requirement. How are you going to help with the perimeter security? What kind of features are you going to use? Do you need to use VPN? For my company have a requirement that all the traffic needs to go through on-prem and doesn't need to expose over the internet through Azure. What are you going to do about it? So that's the kind of MCQs you can expect from a AZ-500 perspective. The difference is, in the earlier exams you were giving them solutions based on requirement, like, what I need to spin virtual machine scale set or other things. Here the questions will be more security focused for you. Okay, let's talk about perimeter security now. So I'll start with defense in depth. So so this is conceptual, okay, which I'm going to explain you. There is no there's no like I can show you some tool or anything, but defense in depth is a concept which is conceptual, which comprises of various technologies which you might want to use to execute your strategy for defense in depth overall. So
Just
as you know.
sorry to interrupt you.
Mhm.
Does it consist also a front door? Because I didn't see a front door in this.
Yes, front door is next. So it's going to come under host security. Yeah. So we are going to talk about it. Okay. Um, yeah. So front door will be there. I'm going to touch front door. Let me put it this way. All right. So just when I talk about defense in depth. So as I said, this works across multiple layers. So essentially the physical and security layer, application, identity and access, perimeter, network, compute, application or data. In these different layers, we use we make use of different features. Okay, I have a nice diagram. Let me show that to you. Okay, I think it will be useful for us to understand the structured approach of defense in depth in a much easier uh, manner. All right, let me share my screen again. Okay, so all right. So from a different layered approach, from a security perspective, these are the different areas which you might want to use. So, for example, from an identity and access management perspective, you might want to use PIM. You might want to use conditional access. From a perimeter security perspective, you might have to use the DDoS or Azure firewall features. Some of those features from a network security perspective, you might use network security groups, application security groups, some micro segmentations into the network. Compute might come in for container security. When it comes to the data, you might want to use different tools, which is very much application specific, like Azure Defender for SQL, Azure Defender for storage, Azure information protection, and these kind of tools you might use for protection against the different host or different layers of security, which we are talking about. But at the high level, I'm going to talk about these in the next few slides. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen one more time, and then I'm going to talk about some of the terminologies which I just discussed very briefly. I'm not going to go in depth, but I'm going to touch on these very, very briefly on what exactly these are and how do they work. So virtual network security is basically, uh, you provision Azure Virtual Network in the cloud, and then essentially how you secure it. So again, the focus is on security related to Azure services and structures. So when I'm doing something like this, I would start from how do we secure your traffic which is coming into your network. How do we separate our applications into Azure? How do we separate dev, test, and production environment? How do we protect internet facing applications? How do we protect DDoS attack? How do we manage DNS? How do we manage or balance traffic across multiple servers? So that is something which I'll think about when I'm talking about virtual network security. As I said, from an infra class perspective, we know what virtual network is, but here we are more focused on the security aspect of this. So essentially, we might want to segment with subnets, add network security group, create a UDR, a point to site connectivity for dev test, VPN gateway, express route for private connects. These are some of the things which you might use for your virtual network security. The idea behind the third point, which is about DDoS, is essentially for an attacker to prevent access to services or systems. Um, uh, so botnets basically use targeted attacks, which can happen without your knowledge. And essentially the purpose of this is to disrupt the availability of your environment. Like I was working with one of my customers. There was a Diwali sale which was going to happen next, and suddenly there was a DDoS attack on their applications a day before that, because they wanted to disrupt the operations. And then we had to find out what exactly is causing it and then try to deal with it. So these are some of the systems which you might want to have. Generally, DDoS implementations can be implemented at the virtual network layers as well. And then there are separate products for implementing DDoS also, but from a virtual network perspective also, with basic and standard service tiers, you will be able to prevent. and do DDoS implementations from your organization perspective. Uh, from an Azure firewall feature perspective, essentially from a security perspective, you want to manage cloud-based network and security service, have a stateful firewall as a service, and have a trusted outgoing connectivity from a inside network to the outside network, basically when I want to go to the internet. So that is one reason you would be using firewall. And of course, Azure Firewall is generally implemented centrally. If you've got multiple spoke VNets in Azure, then we use some traffic filtering on the Azure, and we might use some NVAs also for doing that. Talking about force tunneling, so generally as an organization, you might have a requirement wherein you want to redirect internet bound traffic back to the company's network. So whatever traffic is happening in the cloud, you might want to restrict this. You might want that traffic to go back on-prem. So that is one reason why we can use VPN force tunneling. And so basically, UDR and network virtual appliances essentially help you um, with to override the default system routes and essentially help you go where you need to, basically. So if I want a traffic to flow in a particular direction, then I might use UDR and network virtual appliances as well. So yes, so it's all about protecting myself from the traffic and ensuring the data which is flowing in and out is secured, and I'm using the right tools for using it. Okay, now I'm going to talk about network security. And in this, I'm going to briefly talk about Azure Front Door also. I see there's a question related to Azure Front Door. What is the advantage of Azure Front Door over Application Gateway? Okay, let's see if I can talk about this. All right. So to cover network security groups, as you might see, the function of network security groups is to implement network controls in your environment. Sorry, guys, my kid is just around me. I'm just trying to get him away. Just give me a minute. I'm just a bit distracted. Okay, my apologies, guys. All right. So where I was at network security group. So essentially, I will use network security group to control or limit the virtual network traffic, which I can assign at the VM level or at the subnet level. So in this, basically, I am allowing a set of rules to allow or deny network traffic. So that's where you will use virtual networks for, sorry, NSGs for. Yeah, and NSGs are evaluated independently of the subnet link. And basically, if I'm implementing NSG at the subnet level and at the VM level as well, the rules of allow or deny must exist or at both the levels. And we have some nice tools for doing this, which is something we called as effective security rules. So that is something which usually helps you to find out if there's a problem, and then it also helps you in implementing those. Now, just to give you an example and to answer your question related to load balancing, which is PaaS by design. So generally, this is how I would define it. Okay, so if I need multiple ports to work from a load, and this is the segregation which I'm doing from a load balancing perspective as to what kind of situation I might use app gateway, front door, traffic manager, or I might use load balancer. Okay, so that's at least for right now, it's based on load balancing, and then I'm going to talk about more specifically later. But if I want to load balance multiple ports, okay, then if I need this to be available in a single region, I might use a Azure load balancer for load balancing multiple ports. If I want the same thing to be done across multiple regions, then I might use a traffic manager. So so basically, health probes we get with load balancer, we get session affinity. With traffic manager, I get it as a DNS service, routing methods. I can also implement traffic manager for non-Azure environments, which I can't for the load balancer. And of course, I get health probes just like how I get with load balancer. Now let's talk about app gateways and front door, which I believe was one of the questions also. Generally, both of these things I will use for generally, okay, for ports 80 and 443. So I will use App Gateway for load balancing. I will use App Gateway for security SSL certificate. I might use App Gateway for web app firewall, session draining, multi-site, path-based routing, URL redirection, header rewrites. So that is something which I can use the app gateways for. So front door, I can use in combination with app gateway, traffic manager, and it can be used for DDoS protection. Generally, if I have a multi-region load balancing need and I have 8443, I might go for front door rather than going for app gateways, basically. So that is something which I might use. And as you know, Azure front door is basically layer 7 global routing, which kind of helps you accelerates your application performance with split TCP. It has ability to do URL based routing and session affinity also. Plus, it's a multi-site hosting, so it's not specific to a single region. And then I can also do custom domains, certificate management, URL redirection, URL rewrite, and of course, it supports IPv6 and HTTP v2 traffic also. So I think that's some of the scenarios wherein I might use App Gateway and Azure Front Door Services. Okay. Talking about some of the other things, which is related to service endpoints and private endpoints. So basically, in case of service endpoints, where is that? In case of service endpoints, if I want to limit the network access to specific subnets and IP address, that is where I can make use of service endpoints. So if I have got a storage and I want that storage to be only to have traffic only specific to a particular network, I can use these service endpoint connections. And in certain situations, if I have traffic, to be allowed to multiple networks, in that case, I might be able to use service endpoints also. But again, the point is, I might be in a position to control these things. Private endpoints is basically wherein there's a need for private connectivity to services in Azure, and then I can integrate with an on-premises or peered network, like an Azure private link. So that's essentially when you might use a private endpoint. And of course, I can talk about this in more detail, but these are topic in itself. I see there's a hand up. Pradeep, go ahead. Okay. Maybe there's no question right now. Okay, so does Azure WAF have DDoS protection? Let me tell you. Let me get back to you on this. I'm not sure if it natively supports DDoS protection or not, but yeah, I can check and get back to you on this. Okay, Express Route Direct. So Express Route Direct is basically used for layer 3 connectivity with redundancy. So I can have connectivity with directly with Microsoft Azure Data Center, and that's one of the situations why you might want to use Azure Express Route Direct for your organization. Okay, so as I said, I will be dividing the platform protection into four parts, which is basically perimeter, network, host, and container security. So next, I'm going to talk about a little bit on the host security and try and talk about what are the different details which are involved here. So the concept of endpoint protection is simple, okay, from a host protection perspective. You install an endpoint protection solution um, to the end devices, which could be a virtual machine, and then you use Azure Security Center to monitor it. Azure Security Center for monitoring can help you in multiple ways. It could even help you to monitor if there is any vulnerability, and it has also ability to pass on those logs into Azure Sentinel. So I'm going to talk about Azure Sentinel at the end of the presentation. But yeah, at high level, essentially the endpoint protection or the endpoint system, it interacts with the users directly. So the users interact with them directly. And it's the most important system from a vulnerability to attack. Okay. Azure Security Center provides the tools you need to harden your network and secure your service and solidify your security posture. This is an important topic. So, what I'd like to do is maybe take a couple of minutes and try to explain it to you as to how these attacks happen. Okay. So, I'm going to share my screen and talk you through about how Security Center can help you detect these attacks. All right. So I'm going to share my screen and talk about it. All right. So I'm going to take a simple example. So this is the layer which we are focusing right now, which is the client. So in general, there are three layers in which any environments are classified into. So t- technologically, we call them tier zero, which is for PCs, uh, PCs, Azure AD. This is something which we classify as DS0. Sometime your certificate services, key vault. So this is something which we classify as tier zeros. Okay. Tier two, tier one, sorry. Tier one is generally your member servers, um, other Azure resources. We classify them as tier zeros. Applications, anything else would classify as tier zero, unless it's like super mission critical. So the security is also defined in this tier. And tier two is ideally my clients. So my Windows 10 clients are my tier two. Now, how does the attack happen? And then I'm going to talk next about some of the controls also, which is related to privileged access workstations as to how exactly these works. So typically, you will have multiple workstations, which is like Windows 10 workstations, which are based in here. So this is the area which is more susceptible to attack and which will be attacked more often than anyone. There are multiple ways to attack. The attacks are based on social engineering. The attacks um, could be based on targeted password spray, brute force attack, and there could be multiple ways this could be attacked. But let's talk about how do I secure it. So I'm not going to talk about the tools or anything here, not specific to AZ-500, but moreover, I want to talk about the concept of what it is and how does the attack happen. Okay. And this is something which should strike some things for you, like why Azure AD role access controls and other things are important. This is something which is applicable to on-prem and cloud, both, because now we are living in a hybrid world. Okay. So now I have got one question for you guys. And you can raise your hand to respond and then lower it after your responses. So the first question is, how many of you are using your work laptops and are also local admin to your machines? How many of you? Maybe you can use the nice little feature in Teams to raise your hand and give me an idea as to how many people are there who are local admins. Okay. Okay. Someone said no. So you're not a local admin, which is okay. Let me say if that's good or not. But from the audience, we have got about 10 people who have raised their hands so far who are local admins. Fine. Now, let me tell you this. As an attacker, if I have to attack these machines, so let's assume a scenario like there are around 40 odd people in this class. Maybe 30% of those people are local admin, okay, and others are not, okay. Generally, there are less than 5% people in an organization who are local admin. So these 5% people are the most at risk generally. So as an attacker, I will try to compromise one of these machines, which is local admin. So I might do a brute force on 10 machines or 20 machines. If I'm successful on 20, there is a chance one of these machines might be local admin. Now, how many times it happens that the image of this is built in a particular way? The Windows 10 image is built in a particular way. So you are a local admin, but there is a default local admin on your machines also, which might be called as admin, administrator, company administrator, whatever. Generally, this default admin might be common, not just on this, but it might be common on all the machines which you've got. So or at least a bunch of machines, let me say a group of machines might have the same local admin. Okay, it might have the same local admin, which is not you, but a default local admin which might be there. So as an attacker, the attacker is not going to target you probably, but it might start with a receptionist who has very little knowledge on IT. And then he managed to compromise this using various methods, like using a spoof attack, using a email phishing, using, I don't know, using social engineering, finding out what your password is, various methods. He managed to compromise one machine. And on that machine, you were a local admin. If you were a local admin on this machine, and if in case you in your organizations, your default local admin credentials are not compromised, not randomized, and there are ways to randomize it. So the way you can randomize this is by using a solution called as laps. So that is something which you can use to randomize the local admin credentials. But assuming your organizations did not do it, in that case, what's going to happen with you? So if an attacker compromises one local admin, he might be able to laterally move and compromise multiple other local admins. So what he did is he compromised a bunch of machines in here. Now, in this case, what happened is one of these machines, which he managed to compromise, also happened to be a machine of the admin. So one of the tier 1 admins was using a machine. He was using the same machine to log in to his tier 0. So from his machine, he was also accessing emails. He was also accessing other stuff, internet, and then he was using the same machine to RDP. Now what happened is because the attacker managed to compromise this machine, he managed to compromise the tier 1 also. Then through this tier 1, he might have managed to compromise other machine, but let's assume another scenario. One of the machines was also being used for tier 0 administration. So for your Azure AD administration, one of these machines were using and on which you were a local admin. In this case, the attacker managed to compromise a tier 0 also. The process wherein it managed to compromise one machine and then it moved, we call it as lateral movement. The process of compromising the tier 2 and moving to tier 1, this is something which we call privileged escalation. For both of these things, it is important to prevent it. One of the ways to prevent the lateral movement is by randomizing the local admin password. So if I randomize my local admin password, then I'm able to prevent the lateral movement, which is happening here. If I give specialized workstations to my admin, then I'm able to tackle the privileged escalation also. So these are essentially the two methods which I will use to protect my organization from an attack. So I will use both these methods to essentially reduce my attack surface, which is going to help me. I'm going to go back to our slides and try to explain you just that, which also happens to be our next section from an Azure security perspective. Now, what essentially you do from an endpoint protection perspective. So I told you the first thing about security, Azure security or any security, is to assume breach. So it's important for me to assume breach. Now, from an endpoint protection perspective, which also happens to be the first point, Azure Security Center is something which is going to help me mitigate this risk or alert me that there is a problem in the environment, and this is something which I might have to do to secure it. So it might use Windows Microsoft Defender for endpoint and alert me in the Sentinel portal or through some other mechanism. But the endpoint protection is extremely crucial from an organization perspective for us to prevent these kind of lateral movements. So through Microsoft Defender for endpoint, you are able to protect the lateral movements also, and also it is able to alert you that there is a problem like this in the environment, which is very crucial from our identity and server protection strategy perspective. Now, I talked about two things, lateral movement and privileged escalations. So to detect lateral movements, I will use Microsoft Defender for endpoint, or I'm just taking you through Microsoft Defender for endpoint because we are talking about a Microsoft course here. Of course, there might be some third-party solutions which might be available as well. But from a detection perspective, assuming we are going to use Microsoft Defender for endpoint, which is going to help me. The second thing, which is important, is the uh, randomization of passwords, and you might use certain tools like Labs to randomize the local admin passwords. The third thing which is happening is the privileged escalation. So privileged escalation is happening because you are using the same workstation for your management on which you're a local admin. So local admin means, in other words, owner. So you are a owner of the machine or you're a custodian of that machine. So you have all the rights it needs to do anything you want. Okay, so being a local admin, I can literally do anything I want. Okay, so privileged work access workstations becomes important. So why it's important is I don't want users to have local admin rights. If they have local admin rights, I don't want them to have ability to elevate and escalate to another tier. This is something which can only be avoided by using privileged access workstations. So privileged access workstations are separate workstations through which you access your privileged resources. So if I want to access a tier 0 servers, and if I have got tier 0 devices, then I will follow the principle of zero trust. Okay. In this, I will give them clean machines, which will be a new machine wherein he will not have a lot of rights, and it will be Intune compliant. It will be fully protected, and it will have like highest level of compliance from a from a client hardening perspective or anything, and it only ability would be to access the tier 0 or tier 1 resources. That's how we prevent the privilege escalation. So in this case, assume even if your client machine gets compromised, it still can't compromise your tier 1 or tier 0. So tier 2 stays at tier 2. So if a tier 2 is compromised, the attacker might be able to flow within tier 2, but he'll not be able to go up, which is exactly what the attacker wants. Okay, before I move ahead, I just want to give 2 minutes to take any questions, and then I'm going to move ahead. Okay. 1, 2, 3, no questions. All right, so I'm going to move forward. So that's about privileged access workstation, which I wanted to explain. Let's try and talk about now on, oh, sorry, I'm at the wrong place. I need to move here. Okay, let's try and talk about now on virtual machine templates. Now, why you want to have virtual machine templates in Azure? Now, I don't know if any of you guys are Hyper-V or VMware admin, but in Hyper-V or VMware, generally on premises, what we do is we build some kind of templates through which we install the operating system. Now, the reason why building templates is important is based on my organizational strategy. Whatever things I need from an organizational strategy perspective, that, or some kind of softwares I need to install, security software like Defender for Endpoint, or some of the other management software, or some SIEM or monitoring solution. That is something which I pre-installed into the images. So virtual machine templates is the same thing. It helps you improve your consistency, expresses your deployment, and enforces security concerns, whatever you might have in this. Another thing from a security perspective, which is important, is how you're managing your cloud resources. So there are primarily three methods in which you can access any resource in cloud. Now I'm talking about generally the infrastructure as service, because that is something which needs management. Generally, the PaaS resources has native inbuilt management through Azure portal only, and you only need to kind of run through the Azure portal and secure that using PIM. But when it comes to Azure virtual machines, there are essentially three ways you can access it. One is your remote desktop protocol. The second is your SSH, and third is basically your Azure Bastion. So Azure Bastion is another secure way of accessing your Azure resources through browser-based security, and we recommend this to be done using POP. Again, not going. Sorry, there's a question. No, then maybe you can mute yourself.
So this Azure Bastion is like chargeable or it's like free?
Definitely. So anything in cloud is not free. So
I
yes, it's chargeable.
know like that.
Definitely. There's a charge for Azure Bastion. So generally, what organizations do is usually they keep one or two Bastion servers, and from there you might be able to access other servers internally. But definitely, there is a charge for using Azure Bastion. Okay, moving forward on the update management. Azure has inbuilt capabilities for update management, which is very crucial from a security perspective also, which we call as Azure Patch Management. So that is something which you can use. Another thing, important thing, which will essentially your security center or other things which will give you also is basically using Azure disk encryptions, which is like encrypting your disks so that no one is able to steal it. Even if they steal it, they are not able to open it because the disks are encrypted. It's similar to BitLocker, which we do on premises. Now, what that do is BitLocker would traditionally store keys in Active Directory. In case of Azure, we store keys in Azure HSM, which is a hardware security module. We store it in Key Vault. That's how we do it. Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. It comes with various flavors of operating system. It's with Windows 7, 8, 10, and all the server operating systems. It is there for your Android, iOS, Linux, Mac operating systems as well. So the tool is available everywhere, and it has various features like credential guard, which is more of a virtualization based security, defender for application control to help you mitigate spyware, adware, rootkits, and moreover giving you ability to detect if in case something is going wrong. So that is somewhere which defender for endpoint can really help you. Similar, the thing is with defender for identity. Now, in general, security center recommendation by this, what it means is understanding what kind of function security center is going to play for you. So basically, security center, Azure Security Center is an inbuilt analysis tool. Traditionally, people used to use Qualys or some of the other tools to understand their environment, what's going wrong, and these kind of things, which was done like a one-time activity. Azure has a mechanism inbuilt to help you with these assessments and generally give you recommendation like, there is unauthorized access requested on this server. There is system updates, which is pending. There is endpoint protection, which is not enabled. There is some security best practice, which is missing. This machine is open to RDP. You know, various types of vulnerabilities. It is able to assess and give you the results. The other thing is about securing Azure workloads with Azure Security Benchmark. So this is something which we discussed briefly in Blueprint also. So basically, you can define what kind of benchmarks you want to have for your organization. I gave you an example of CIS. Basically, in this we can implement security control and service set up service baselines, which kind of help you define what kind of baselines I want to have and what it takes to protect it. And if there is any server which is not meeting that baseline, and what do you need to do to improve it, basically. Okay, I'll wait for 1 minute to take if there's any question. If not, we'll move forward. Okay, I'm going to move forward. I realize I've taken a lot of time, so I'll try to finish these things a little bit faster, but hopefully we should still be able to understand it. Okay, so talking about Azure Key Vault in general. So Azure Key Vault is something which you use to store your tokens, passwords, certificates, API keys, and other secrets. This is something which you can use to store Azure Key Vault, to use Azure Key Vault for. Um, Public and private SSL certificates is something you can use, and it is backed by hardware security modules. So HSM is a device which many of your organizations might be using on-prem. So when it comes to secrets, you would want to protect your secrets securely and have it on a hardware device. This is where HSM comes in handy. Like for Microsoft PKI, we use HSM extensively. So this is this is one of the reasons why you might want to use Azure Key Vault, as it doesn't store your secret on a machine or in some container, but it stores it on a server which is meant to store your secret and which has much higher level of security based on FIPS and some of the other compliances. Uh, yeah, and essentially some of the other functions which it talks about here is you have ability to secure your keys, and the Azure Key Vault is FIPS level 2, FIPS level 3 compliant when it comes to security. But in general, what I mean to say is with Azure Key Vault, you're able to safely secure your secrets and use it. Also, you have ability to manage who has access to what kind of resources and what kind of secrets. So that is something which can be totally controlled using RBACs and some of the other mechanisms. Now, this is where one of you guys asked a question, which was around integrating applications with Azure Active Directory and how I can make it secure. So the question was more around how to use Azure Active Directory for application integration. This is a very crucial questions, uh, which comes in when you're talking about migrations or some of the other things. But in general, if I have to take a minute and explain you this, the Microsoft Identity Platform and the Microsoft APIs comprises of three things. One is the Azure Active Directory, which is your work and school accounts. The second is personal accounts, which is Microsoft account. And then you have got Azure AD B2B and B2C accounts. So all of these things it is able to integrate with and then give you a seamless single sign-on experience. So if you're talking about registering Azure application, okay, which could be like a single app, a web API, um, a background process, maybe like daemon, mobile app like iOS, Android, desktop apps like Windows, Linux, Mac apps, all of these can definitely be integrated with Azure Active Directory. That is something which is possible. This is done by something called as Azure App Registration. Okay, let me show you real quick on what these are. Okay, where is my browser? Okay, there it is. So if I go to Azure Active Directory again, and here you will see a tab which is for app registration. So if I have some custom made apps which is registered on-prem or which is registered in the cloud, this is something which I can go here and I can register my application. If I want the application to be multiple tenant, single tenant, personal accounts only, this is something which I define. And then I specify application specific information, like what exactly is the application being used, and different things around this scenario. Now, of course, this is, as I said, this is a topic in itself, but I just wanted to share this information at a high level as to what exactly it is. Okay, I'll take if there's any question while the slide is loading up again. Okay, since there's silence, I'm assuming no question, and we'll move forward to okay. So again, there are many things inside this, like Microsoft Graph, which is an open API wherein you can manage your permissions and other things. So that is something which is available also. All right, now I'm going to talk a little bit about storage security. Uh, now, for securing the secret of Azure storage, there are multiple things which you can do. Okay, not going into detail because you might have studied storage in your 104 exams, but essentially, uh, storage I can secure using multiple tools. One of them would be to restrict my network traffic through storage. Okay, so I can restrict like who has access to the storage through my network traffic. Other than that, storage has something called as storage account shared key. Okay, so if you guys know symmetric key encryption, this is how it works. It works based on symmetric key encryption, wherein the same key is used for encryption and decryption. So that is something which you can use. You could also use Azure Active Directory for authentication. So if you want to access your Azure storage, you can enforce Azure Active Directory authentication. You can enforce on-premises AD authentication also on storage. That is something which is possible also, but of course you need to sync your users with Azure Active Directory to be able to do that. But yes, that is something which is definitely possible. So these are some of the methods you might want to use for securing your storage accounts in the cloud. Okay, can we manage and secure on-prem infra of SCCM and SCOM by Azure Security Center? Yes, you can. You can. So if you have got, uh, you can use Azure Patch Management to manage your resources, to patch your resources on premises as well. Uh, you can use Azure Security Center to monitor the security status of your resources on-prem as well. So definitely a big yes. So does Azure Bastion has any session limit? That's a good question. Oh, Pradeep, unfortunately today I don't think I have direct answers to you, but I believe yes. It has some session limits. I don't know exactly, but there are certain session limits for Azure Bastion. But good question. Okay. Yes. So these are some of the features which you might want to use for your Azure security. Um, As I said, you could use Azure AD authentication. You could use Azure Files authentication with Azure Active Directory. So all of that is definitely possible. Now, let's talk about the database security. Okay, so from an Azure SQL database perspective also, there are certain security measures which you could implement. So let me probably give you a quick demo and show it to you. Okay. Where is my this? All right. I think I have a SQL somewhere here. Yeah. So from a SQL database perspective also, there are various levels of security you can add from an authentication perspective and authorization perspective also, and network perspective also. Like you see right now, I have got this SQL database. I can set a firewall on this server. So this is something which through the security engineer from a threat modeling perspective, like what exactly is needed. Do I want to give access to just a virtual network, which I already have, or something like that? That is something which you define here. The controls on the SSL ciphers, like what kind of TLS versions you want. Is it going to be TLS 1.0, 1.1, 1.2? Do you want to allow lower versions also or not? You might want to allow if in case you have got users who use still legacy version, but you might not want to if in case they should not. So that is something which you can define. Other than that, I believe you can define some connection strings, um, the authentication type. Security center is right here, which is something which is going to help you in finding out what kind of vulnerabilities you have in your database. Are you doing enough auditing for your database? And various other things. So that is something which is possible as well. Now I have not started this, of course, in my lab, so that's why it's giving me an error. But this is certainly something which you could do from securing and from a security perspective. All right, I'm going to get back to my slides because I realize I've just become a little bit over time, and I'll try to cover the content and finish it in the next few minutes. Okay. So yeah, that's basically SQL related security which you can use. Other than that, the last thing which I want to cover is more majorly on Azure Monitor, Log Analytics, and Azure Sentinel, which also happens to be, one of the important areas from a overall monitoring perspective, and this exam also. So I believe this is about 25% of your exam. So as I said, 30 to 35 is identity, database, and others is like 15 to 20%. And this again is about 25% from a exam perspective. So let's have a look at these briefly one by one. So I'm going to talk about Azure Monitor, Security Center, and Azure Sentinel. So Azure Monitor helps you with multiple things. Okay, so it helps you with essentially with five pillars. First thing is to give you insights on how your environment is. Then have ability to visualize these things as to what exactly is happening. Analyze to analyze the metrics as to how things are and what it means to you. Respond. Okay, respond is here. As you know, security is built on three fundamentals: detect, attack, detect, and respond. So essentially, you won't want to be in a position to detect, and then you want to be in a position to respond also. From a response perspective, it has ability to trigger alerts and auto scale for us. And at the same time, it is able to integrate with some of the other applications, which I can do to automate. So for example, if there's a X kind of an alert, and whenever this is triggered, I want it to do certain functions, then I can integrate them with logic apps, or I can integrate with event hubs, and so to have those kind of actions implemented. So that is something which your Azure Monitor can help. Now, the way Azure Monitor works is it stores all this information, the data which is collecting, into log analytics, and then it has ability to parse them into into Azure Sentinel also, which is like our central repository for all log collection. So what this means is, so essentially log analytics is something which collects and analyzes your resource data, which can be again. So I remember one of you guys asked if you could use Azure Patch Management on-prem. You can use log analytics also for on-prem and Azure servers. So it's not just that I can use it for on-prem or I can use it for Azure. You could still use it for on-prem as well. From a connected sources perspective, you could connect multiple sources to log analytics like Linux, Windows, some of the other third-party clouds also. You could connect. And as I said, you will be in a position.
என்ன பண்ண தெரியுமா?
Yeah, so essentially, Azure Monitor can help you connect multiple data sources at the same time. It can help you monitor these alerts and deal with it as well. So yeah, that's at high level what Azure Monitor is. Again, it's a native feature for Microsoft, which in the backend uses Azure Log Analytics. Azure Security Center. So Azure Security Center has an important function to kill the cyber chain. Okay. So cyber kill chain has in general 8 steps. Okay. And I talked about two specifically when I showed you the little presentation on a password attack or a pass through attack, which was escalation and lateral movement. Okay. And I did tell you that time briefly that this is something Azure Security Center can help you. But in general, a cyber kill chain has 8 steps. It is reconnaissance, intrusion, exploitation, escalation, lateral movement, denial of service, and exfiltration. Now, the concept of Azure Security Center is it wants to kill this chain. How do we kill this chain? We kill this chain by preventing, detecting, and responding. Now, on all these three parameters, Azure Security Center is a help for any organization to be able to do that because it is a central help, central system for monitoring your security status. So everything comes in here. It has ability to protect not only cloud, Azure cloud, but it has ability to protect Azure hybrid, which is on-prem, and then other cloud resources also. So that is something which it can help you. Secondly, it can consistently and continuously assess your environment to be able to tell you real time if there's any problem in the environment. And then it is something which can help you ensure that there's certain level of compliance which is met. So someone asked me a question. How are blueprints enforced? And where are these enforced? So this is something which you can enforce in Security Center. You can enforce it at the subscription level, but it would make more sense to have blueprints enforced and security settings enforced in Security Center so you can find out what is going wrong in the environment. Okay, and yeah, then there are certain set of Azure benchmark policies which you can apply, which is like Azure Security Benchmark, and then there is PCI, and then there is ISO. So there are multiple security center policies which are inbuilt into Azure, which is that is something which you can comply with from your organizational perspective also. Secure score is another important feature. So I showed you a secure score for Azure Active Directory, but there is a similar secure score which you can get in Azure Security Center also. And this time, not just for Azure Active Directory, but you could get it for your resource groups. You could get it for your subscriptions also. Like, there is one specific subscription. What kind of secure score does this subscription have? That is something which you can definitely find out um, using this. Okay. Right. Let's talk about some of the other things, which is around Azure Sentinel. So what exactly is Azure Sentinel and how does it help you from an organizational perspective? So Azure Sentinel collects data at cloud scale across all users, all devices, applications, and the entire infrastructure. By default, the logs from Microsoft Defender for Identity, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Microsoft Defender for Office 365. That is something which is shared with Azure Sentinel. So Azure Sentinel should already have access to this. And then it has ability to integrate with some of the other connectors also. And I'll show you in a minute some of the connectors as to how it works. But in general, what I'm trying to tell you is it's like a SIEM solution for the entire organization, which is a central place for it to collect data. And because it's a central place, it also has ability and view of the entire organization. So this is where Azure Sentinel can help you detect threats and minimize the false positive. So there are four fundamental pillars on which it works. So there is collect, detect, investigate, and respond. So So all of this is something which is possible. You can do threat hunting in Azure Sentinel. There are certain playbooks which is already available through which if there is any alert detected, you can do to what extent this is spread and what exactly is happening. All of this you might be able to find out using Azure Sentinel. Let me try to show you in the presentation as to how exactly the connectors look like. Okay, and then I'll try to close. Okay, so this is my Azure Sentinel, and this is where my data connectors is. So these are the different types of data connectors I can integrate with Azure Sentinel. So all Microsoft, non-Microsoft, Azure Activity, Azure DTAS, AIP, Azure Storage, Cisco ASA, CyberArk, all these different providers, I have ability to integrate this into Azure Sentinel and have this as a single place for my entire org SIEM structure perspective. Of course, it contains Microsoft Defender for endpoint, which I was discussing earlier. Like you see, Microsoft 365 Defender, Microsoft Cloud App Security, Defender for identity. All of this, it has ability to integrate also with basically Azure Sentinel. So there are about 116 connectors which you can integrate with. So if you have these some of these features already as a SIEM solution, you would probably want to integrate it with Azure Sentinel so that you get a full organizational overview as to what exactly is going on. Other than that, Azure Sentinel has workbooks, which is well-known workbooks like certain templates. So you don't have to build templates by your way. So if you want to find out how exactly Azure AD sign-ins are in your environment, go here, check it. If you want to find out what kind of risks you have, or if there's anything wrong happening in the environment, there are certain um, you know information like Azure Information Protection. So information protection is something which is used for protecting my files and data. So if there's anything wrong going on with information protection, you can find it out here. Which you can integrate here with incident overview also. If there's a particular attack which you're trying to hunt, all these templates are inbuilt for you. Even for hunting, now my workspace is empty, so I can't show you exactly, but even for hunting, there are multiple templates which are available for you to be able to do it, which might be related with Microsoft, it might be related to my non-Microsoft, but yeah, essentially you don't need to know KQL or other types of queries to be able to run it by yourself, but there are certain templates which are available for you already to be able to do it. And then there's a lot of information available for it online also in GitHub, so you might be able to find the queries in GitHub. You can build it by yourself also if you're aware about how to build it. So that is something which you can do also. Yeah, let me go back to my presentation. There are certain additional resources also which you can prefer for the same thing, AZ-500, which is Microsoft Learn, some of the Azure documentation, Azure Forums, Azure Tuesdays with Corey, that's brilliant, Azure Fridays with Scott Hansman, which is great as well. And then you've got, of course, some of the Channel 9 videos, Azure blogs, Azure Learning Community blogs. And of course, you've got various YouTube's videos from Kasam, which is great as well, I must say. So yeah, guys, I think that's pretty much it from my end, Kasum. Unless you have any closing remarks or if there's any question, I'm happy to take.
Thank you, Qasim.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Kasum.
Sheikh.
Take care.